Let's go through the process a supervisor would use on a day-to-day basis to do a checkup and execute this software system. The supervisor would pull up on their tablet a dashboard, and on this dashboard we had purposely designed it to have in front of them the current status of the team in terms of what their baseline is, where their performance is, what the mastery level goals are, and where they stand on that on a day-to-day basis. We've also created a behavioral categories, so we could not only look at overall performance and all the behaviors of the process they were looking at, but really important behaviors, very configurable. For example, if safety behaviors were particularly important, or that was the focus of the organization, or it might be team skills or customer experience, whatever they wanted to focus on. We also have a sequence of color-coded progress. Lost it. We have a sequence of color-coded progress indicators to indicate how sustainable the behavioral category is, because it's very important to us, not only the improved performance of an employee, but how long and well that is sustained over time. And it's also can be very valuable if an organization wants to use this for a reward and recognition system. Now, normally a supervisor would pull this up, take a quick look at how the team's doing, possibly gain some area they want to focus on, and then they would see every employee that reports to them, and by name, by position. There are indicators on the screen that checkups are due, and the history of the checkups. There's a little spark line to show exactly whether they're trending up, whether they're trending down, their last average score. And very quickly and simply, if they just want to go in and observe an employee working and do a checkup, they just hit that employee, and up pops all the processes that are available to do a checkup on. And the supervisor simply clicks on a little box to put the different processes on that they want to do a checkup, or they can go down as low as just steps they want to check up. Very often they just have a minute or two, so they just want to use that. And then they start the checkup process. So what the supervisor has in front of them is a list of the steps and the behaviors that they're looking at. And it's a simple process of the supervisor observing what the employee is doing and determining quickly whether the behavior exists or not. It's an exception system. If the behavior is fine, the way it exists, they don't do anything. If something doesn't exist, they simply unclick a check mark and go on. Another part of the process which is important for the learning is what we call the self-checkup. This doesn't have to be done, but it's an important aspect in the beginning process of learning. Typically, the supervisor would watch the work being done, complete the checkup. If there was time, they would hand the tablet device to the employee, and they would do a checkup on themselves. They would evaluate what they had just done, and this is an important part of the learning process. If this couldn't happen right at this time because it's a quick-moving operation, this can be done later by the employee. Once the self-checkup is done, the process is closed out, and a results screen appears to the supervisor and the employee. And the supervisor and employee now start what we call the Thrive process. because this is the process for improving what is happening. So the next really learning process is the presentation of results. The results appear in a lollipop chart, and all of the behaviors are presented, and in terms of a color-coded scale, and there's an algorithm behind this scale that pops up from green, which means everything is fine, up to pink and red, which means these are behaviors that are deficient and need to be worked on, and a learning opportunity probably needs to be applied to improve these. So the supervisor and the employee review the results, they talk about the results, and then there's the opportunity for the supervisor, if they wish, to give reward or recognition to that employee and record what they did. The system also suggests a sequence of deeper level interventions, learning interventions, that go all the way up to actually demonstrating and practicing the process. These learning opportunities are deliver the deliberative reflective practice philosophy. Behind each of these, there is there's guidance. So the software guides the supervisor in terms of what to do. It guides them in terms of what questions to ask, follow-up questions for each of these processes. Even includes a peer observation process where employees can work together, observing each other and evaluating each other. Again, an algorithm suggests what level the employee needs. And again, the philosophy behind this is the supervisor is in control. They're responsible for the learning and growth of the employee. So they actually determine, even though the system suggests where to go. They may decide to go to a higher level intervention. They may decide that all they need to do is look at the results and move on. They may decide they want to ask a few questions. There's also an opportunity for the supervisor to evaluate certain aspects of this Thrive process. Very important to learning is how aware the employee is. Do they understand the process? Do they understand the results? Do they feel like they're responsible for it? Are they committed for it? And we provide an opportunity, again, at the supervisor's discretion to score these on a 5-point scale, so they can refer to these in the future to see if the employee is having an understanding problem, or is a lack of commitment problem, or a responsibility problem. This Thrive meeting is intended to just last a few minutes. It deals with each step, and if something happens in a typical business operation, if there's a meeting going on and they can't finish the process, it can be they can come back to it later, or it can be quickly closed out, and the process can move on. Essentially, after this Thrive process is complete, the next task is to do another checkup to see if learning took place and if it was translated into more effective practice. After the supervisor and employee do the checkup and the self-checkup, the next thing that happens is a checkup results screen appears. And this is a very powerful screen in terms of learning. At the top of the screen is something we call a lollipop chart. There's a lot of information in this lollipop chart. We have it coded by supervisor and subject. Supervisor is color-coded as gray. The subject is color-coded as blue. And what this chart shows is a correlation between, by behavior, of what the supervisor thought was happening and what the subject thought was happening. Supervisor and subject can quickly look at this and see where they were on the same page and where they were totally opposite. And this is actually beginning part of the data that creates the algorithm for opportunities. Also on this chart is a little dot that's color-coded anywhere from a dark green to a red. It's a sequence of 5. And that shows the behaviors that need the most intervention in terms of the learning opportunities. And those numbers correlate with, down below this graph, with all the behaviors that have just been checked up on for that step. And again, the color codes exist next to those behaviors, and it also shows in a different form whether the subject thought it was in compliance and the supervisor thought it was in compliance. So it reflects in a different form that lollipop chart. So from this chart, basically, it's very clear and very quickly, supervisor and subject can determine where they were on the same page and what particular behaviors need to be dealt with in terms of further work or further improvement work. On the tablet, below the checkup results area is what we call the growth area. This area provides the opportunities for the employee to grow and improve some of the behaviors that they had difficulty with. The whole area has been set up as a sequence of interventions based on our philosophy of deliberative reflective practice. So in the beginning, there's a light intervention of just asking questions, for example, to the end where they're actually demonstrating. And let me go through each of them and define them. The first one is simply a reward and recognition. It's very possible that the employee performed at a high level. There were no deficiencies identified, and we feel it's important that the employee be recognized for that. Some organizations may want to go so far as to go beyond a recognition and give a reward, so we provide that opportunity in that section. The next section is depth reinforcing questions. The process of questioning is an important aspect of learning. And we're trying to get away from, and again, the research says nobody really learns anything by telling them something, but reflecting on questions really helps. Even questions such as describe to me what you just did, to see if they really understand what they were doing, or questions that you did a good job at what you did. Can you think of a better way to do it? So those reinforce the depth of what they're doing, because we're not only, even if they perform perfectly, we're trying, our goal is to make that sustainable. So we want to get, that's where the depth reinforcing comes from. We want to deepen their ability. Feed forward, obviously, is a word taken off of feedback. Again, we feel the word feedback indicates telling people, and would indicate to our supervisor to tell the employee that you didn't do this right and this is how you ought to do it. That is proven not to be an effective learning practice. Feed forward is a word that replaces the word feedback. We don't believe feedback, and again, research-based, is an effective practice. It's a telling practice. It's telling somebody what to do, and we don't want to guide the supervisor to tell somebody that you didn't do it right and this is how you ought to do it. We want the employee from a learning perspective to come to their own conclusion on what the best practices is. So feed forward are questions by the supervisor, and again, there's guidance as to what kind of questions to ask, and even follow-up questions. These are the types of questions that ask employees, how could you do what you just did better? Do you have suggestions of better behaviors? And even asking them a little bit about how they felt about what they were doing. Or were there things that were going through their mind that they were questioning about what they were doing. Next level is mental self-reflection. Great deal of research on the fact that mental practice, visualizing doing something, improves what you're doing. And so just sitting and going through the process mentally, as long as you go through it properly, improves the practice. I think many have heard of the process of those who mentally practice shooting free throws actually did better than those who actually practice shooting free throws. So this is the next level of mental practice. The next level is physical and vocal self-reflection. So they're basically physically practicing the process, vocalizing and describing what they're doing. Again, this happens in front of the supervisor, and this gives the supervisor the opportunity to make sure the thinking is right behind the physical actions. It's very possible that a person can perform the right action, but mentally they're not there, which means in the future that it's not going to be sustainable, and it may be the cause of a deficient behavior. Peer observation is the next level. This is based on the philosophy, and again, research proven, that nobody learns more than the teacher. Teacher always learns more than the student. So this is the process of an employee observing another employee going through the process, and then and self-evaluating, and then reversing. That the employee observes them going through that process with a checkup and reversing. And we think there's hardly anything more powerful than two employees getting together and trying to become more effective in their jobs. So the next level is guided mental practice. This is the process of basically a supervisor helping to guide the mental practice of, again, visualizing going through the process. So an employee would vocalize what they went through and visualize, but vocalize so the supervisor could hear what they're thinking and what they're doing. And now the supervisor is actually guiding that practice where the thinking is not quite right to perform the process at the highest level. Guided physical practice is actually having the employee go back and go through the process, and the supervisor basically would interrupt the process at the right point in time, say, and again, in a guidance mode, think about doing it this way, think about doing it this way instead of that way, and so on. And again, we don't want it to be do it this way, this is the only way, because there's many ways to do a process, but think about this, think about that. And lastly is the supervisor actually going through and demonstrating the process, going through the process the way they feel it should be performed, and then modeling that process, and then having the employee follow that demonstration with trying to model what the supervisor did. So that's the highest level of deliberative reflective practice, we feel. And each of these builds up to that sequence. And all of these practices are based on the deliberative reflective practice research and a lot of other research in terms of how adults learn. Our goal, of course, is to improve employee performance at the behavioral level and have that performance become superior over a sustained period of time. And how we do that, basically, it starts with the checkup. So we have a baseline of what a supervisor thinks an employee is doing from a performance level. And the learning of the employee begins with the process of doing the self-checkup. And a best practice is for that self-checkup to not only be done by the employee, but even to verbalize that self-checkup so the supervisor can get an understanding of what they're thinking about. The next level of learning happens when the employee and the supervisor get an opportunity to look at the results chart. And they see the lollipop chart, and they see the color-coded, and they see the behaviors, and they see where any deficiencies occurred. So now the employee becomes aware of what needs to be worked on, in addition to the supervisor. But it's a very powerful learning experience for the employee to understand what they're doing according to the standards of the organization and what needs to be improved. And then tied into that is the growth and opportunities piece. This is where the real growth and learning happens. This is where the deliberative reflective practice philosophy comes in. This is the beginning of starting to take those deficient behaviors, tweaking them, working on them at a light level, or going very, very deep in terms of really getting the employee down in terms of effective doing. It really is kind of the process of going from just knowing about something to really being able to effectively do it. There are a number of things as we meet with customers. They have requested other features of the screen that they would help them. Particularly industry by industry, there are some particular things in industries that they would like to change. And one of the things that the sequence of interventions it kind of works well for all industries. That's something that is solid. But the evaluation questions, and even the questions within the depth reinforcing questions and so on, the process wouldn't change, but the questions may change by industry. So those things we need to configure for by industry, or have the ability to do that. There's also some thought that behind the reward and recognition, if an industry has, or a company has a specific reward program or recognition program, that it would become more specific for that company. So, for example, if their culture gave gift certificates at a certain level, and one of the things that we can do is we're showing visual performance, so they could decide at a certain performance level, people get a gift certificate for a restaurant. So they would like that configuration. And then our evaluation questions, the different industries would like those questions to be different, because we feel that awareness and understanding are very important for processes. But for example, when you come to the process of effective teaching, those questions would probably be different. So the questions need to be reconfigured. Our customers really like the 5-point scale and being able to evaluate those things, but would like a different question. Within our system, we have roles defined, and we have dashboards for some of the different roles. One of our roles is the executive role. Uh, Organizations could define this any way they want. They could even configure a different word for executive, but these would generally be the directors and the vice presidents, and or like a superintendent, or um, possibly even a principal. Uh, and the intention of the dashboard is to show the overall performance historically and at a current level of where the organization is that reports to that particular executive. And we want to keep in front of that executive day-to-day performance. One of the things we found is that at top levels of organization, they really don't know on a day-to-day basis what's going on out in the field. And as these checkups happen and so on, they can really focus in on where there are areas that are problems, or where things are happening are good, or where they need to refocus. Or a number of our clients have said it takes the worry out of what's actually going on in the field. For example, at the top of our dashboard, we have our key behavioral focus. These are configurable classifications of behaviors. For example, we found that safety is very important. An executive might be very focused on a safety in their organization and want to see where all the safety behaviors are. So we provide the history of the checkups on safety behaviors, what the current score is, and what the sustained progress of that behavior is. And it could be anything from a high level of safety or quality down to how courteous are our frontline workers to customers. Whatever the organization wanted to focus on, and even over time they may want to have some new areas of focus and eliminate other areas of focus. We also always provide a graph of the overall performance. So the executive can see progress from, we set a baseline of performance when we start. We set a mastery level of performance. We have it at a default of 90%, but that could be changed. And then there's a historical graph to show where the performance is. So a quick look by the executive can see if the performance overall is trending up or trending down, can look back at specific behaviors to see where that's going. We also provide a graphical performance. So in an organization, for example, they could look at a regional division, they could look at a specific location, they could look at even a piece of an organization, just a division within a plant, for example. And so this gives that perspective. And lastly, on the executive dashboard would be the performance of the processes. So they have all the processes that are being checked up on. So if they could look at an overall process and see where that stands in terms of what the history is, what the current average is, where it's trending, and what the sustained progress is. So that's a high level look at the organization of a performance, and from an executive point of view, but we think it's also a deep look into the organization of what's happening almost at a real-time basis. An important feature throughout the software, whether behavioral progress, whether individuals, we have something called spark lines. And we have spark lines all the way down to a behavioral level. So we can look at an employee, we can look at a process, we can look at an employee in terms of their process level of history, their step level, their behavior level. And these spark lines are a really nice look at how their behaviors are trending or how the processes there are trending, whether they're going up, whether they're down, whether they're flat. And it really helps a supervisor focus in on those employees that need help, what areas they need help in, and even at the executive level, spark lines help say, you know what, we're really good on safety, but we're slipping on quality, so can help the organization focus more on some of those behaviors. So it really gives a quick look at the organization and really the ability to have some quick response in terms of areas of refocus. One of the things we found with our clients is they love the feature of presenting performance in terms of measurement. When you put something in a graphical trend line like a spark line, when you have a number of percentage of relative to a baseline, when you have percentages regarding sustained progress, it quickly focuses in executive, supervisor, and employee on where they stand. Even from a results point of view, it's one thing for an employee to say that you've done well, but it's another thing to tell the employee that you're performing at a 95% level. It has much more impact. So the analytics in the system are very, very important. The way the system is today, it's very powerful. We want to develop the system into even more powerful analytics in terms of more configurable dashboards and reporting functions, and really providing a tool that executives, supervisors, managers can really dig into their organization and help refocus the organization on where it needs to be focused on.